ES Audio.
Hello, this is the Evening Standard Theatre Podcast, coming to you this week from London's Criterion Theatre. I'm Nick Curtis, the Standard's chief theatre critic.
Hello, I'm Nancy Durrant, culture editor.
Hi, I'm Nick Clark, the deputy culture editor.
Coming up, we'll be reviewing A Little Life, starring Happy Valley's James Norton, It's a Sin's Omari Douglas, and Bridgerton's Luke Thompson, based on the novel by Hanya Yanagihara. It's now on at the Harold Pinter Theatre.
Plus, for our second review, we'll be discussing Ryan Calais Cameron's For Black Boys Who Have Considered Suicide When the Hue Gets Too Heavy.
Let a black boy dance and let him take up as much space as he needs. Let him step into his promise. Don't you dare hold him back.
That's on at the Apollo Theatre, after runs at the Royal Court and the New Diorama.
We'll also be joined by Natasha, Hodgson and David Cumming to talk about their new musical, Operation Mincemeat.
If you want to beat them Jerry's, you gotta call upon the visionaries. Cause if you're in trouble, don't scream and shout. Just call the English public school boys, we'll sort it all out. It's time for ambition, time to show you've got vision.
That's on at the Fortune Theatre.
They'll be hoping that theatre lives up to its name. They're following on from the very recently departed The Woman in Black, which ran there for, 33 years?
We're coming to you this week from the Lord Attenborough Bar at the Criterion Theatre. We're surrounded by cherubs and some lovely stained glass windows in the theatre that's just about still home to the Unfriend.
Yes, the writer of The Unfriend, Stephen Moffat, of Sherlock and Doctor Who fame, was our first interview on this podcast.
Yes, and obviously you can listen to that whenever you want, but I think the show's on for a couple more weeks, isn't it?
Yes, Sunday, April 16th.
It's been a fairly quiet week for openings this week, hasn't it? The major news was something else?
Yes, it feels like an age since the Olivier's last weekend. Everyone in theatre's keeping a low profile.
There weren't really any big surprises at the Olivier's, were there?
No, I mean, I personally was surprised that My Neighbour Totoro did so well, really, because, but I was sort of aware that I was slightly a lone voice crying in the wilderness at my slight, that show left me slightly cold, you know, I could acknowledge its technical superiority, but it just didn't sort of move me in any way. I think you felt the same.
Yeah, I did. I think, the thing is, you know, Studio Ghibli is kind of a cult, and like so many people, grown-ups and children, absolutely love it. And as you say, I can watch the films, I quite like them, but I probably don't need to see them more than once. And it just wasn't for me, but it was kind of an extraordinary thing, so I wasn't wildly surprised.
Yeah, just one other thing to pick up on, I suppose, is that all the old sort of musical big names are absent this year. All the nominees for Best Musical are pretty much newcomers. Well, I suppose Elton John and Jake Shears you couldn't call as newcomers for Tammy Faye at the Almeida, but you know, that's James Graham, the writer, is the motivating force in that, you know, rather than the big producers like Andrew Lloyd Webber or Cameron McIntosh. Standing at the Sky's Edge at the National was the winner in that category. Yeah. You know, again, Chris Bush, incredibly, she must be vying with James Graham for the title of most prolific playwright around at the moment. Yeah. Nice to see. Special award to Dame Arlene Phillips and a Lifetime Achievement Award to Sir Derek Jacobi, who took the opportunity to rail against ticket prices being too expensive and
he did
rendering theatre elitist, which you know, some people would argue it always has been to an extent, but I think, you know, he makes a salient point that we discussed in the podcast last week.
Yeah, him and Waleed Akhtar, who won Best Achievement in Affiliate Theatre for his show The P Word. He was the only other person who made a sort of even vaguely political speech, which was, you know, I realised I was there actually, and it was very much kind of, here are all the people I want to thank you very much, and that's very nice, and like nobody really said anything. Nobody took that opportunity except for Waleed, and I felt like that was a good from him. There's not much else to talk about. Isn't it? Nothing's happened.
Well, early doors for the podcast this week then.
Shall we kick off with our first review then?
Yes.
It's A Little Life at the Harold Pinter Theatre.
This is an adaptation by Ivo van Hove, the Belgian director who mostly works in Amsterdam but massively internationally, of Hanya Yanagihara's controversial and runaway hit novel about four college friends making a go of it in New York, one of whom, it is discovered, has been serially and multiply abused throughout his life. And it's about his friends' attempts to sort of break through the carapace of shame that he's developed as a result of this. It stars James Norton, who a few of you may have heard of. He's been in a couple of little TV things like Happy Valley and Grantchester. He does have a stage track record. He was at the Donmar a couple of years ago. But this is a real step up for him. It's an incredibly challenging part to play, not just because of the subject matter, but because he's on stage almost the whole time. It lasts almost 4 hours. I suspect this is going to be very much a Marmite production. It's not something you could actually say that you like, but I think it's a tremendous piece of theatre. It's a tremendous piece of work.
I was dreading this. It was not quite as horrific as I was expecting, but it's pretty bloody relentless. I mean, it's not saying a great deal, is it? It's not horrid. But in and of itself, I agree with you. I think this is a really, really good piece of work. I know that you've read the book, and you said in your review that you found it sort of compelling but horrifying and wanted to kind of throw it away from you.
Yeah, I couldn't put it down, but I really wanted to actually physically hurl it away from me at times. I found it exasperating and compelling in equal measure.
I haven't read it, and when I knew I was going to go and see it, I sort of thought maybe I should read it, but then I kind of fell back on my original instinct, which was, it's 800 pages of unrelenting misery and maybe my life is too short. But also I felt like what that allows me to do is to judge without any kind of prior understanding, although I knew it was going to be full of terrible things, that whether or not it works in its own right as a theatrical adaptation or as a theatrical piece on its own. I genuinely think it does. Yeah,
we should probably give a couple of trigger warnings here, which they do give quite rightly. Yes. There are graphic descriptions and enactments of sexual abuse, very graphic renderings of self-harm. It is sort of relentless. I mean, the book is relentless, the play is fairly relentless.
Yeah, I was trying afterwards to, even though I thought it was very good, to work out why it existed.
Yes.
But I was with somebody who was saying, he was sort of quite cross about it, I think, and he was saying, art should have a moral, and I kind of, it's not easy to ascertain what that is here. And actually I've been sort of thinking about it ever since. Why is it a facile expectation of a piece of art that it should give us an easily discernible moral? Or is it okay if it just sort of explores various different areas of experience and doesn't leave you with an easy conclusion? Like, is it just too much to ask? Or is it just absurd that we should expect that? And I sort of feel like it maybe is.
Yeah, I think that's probably right.
There are sort of two sides to this that I could see. And one of them is the experience of Jude, which is almost unbelievably horrific. I do know some people who sort of said when the last kind of arrow of fortune hits him in the book, you're just like, oh, come on.
Yes.
It gets to that point. And it's so horrific that actually it's almost quite difficult to empathise because it's so beyond, thank God, it's so beyond most people's experience.
There's a risk of overkill, isn't there?
Yeah, but what I did find deeply moving about it and what actually made me a little bit teary when I came out of the theatre, I had to take a few minutes to kind of just to sort of discombobulate myself, was the reactions of all of the other characters, like the deep, unconditional, unrelenting love that they were giving to him consistently throughout, even when they didn't know and they couldn't understand why he was in such pain and he couldn't tell them, and how sad they were, how completely devastated they were by what happens to him in the end. It was that just really got me.
It is one of the triumphs of this production over the inconsistency or the problems of the story. There does have a question that has to be asked of how have these people formed this deep, deep, deep love for somebody who tells them nothing about himself.
Yeah.
And they quite often exasperatedly say to him, why don't you talk to us? And you sort of think, well, how have they formed this friendship? What's it based on? I'm not giving too much away that if I sort of tell you that he's basically sold into slavery as a child prostitute at one point, for most of his life, and abused through every sort of part of the care system or the structures that are supposed to protect him. Yet he manages to be this brilliant lawyer, mathematician, interpreter of Mahler's Lieder and Baker, and you think, well, how did he manage this?
So I haven't seen this, and that's why I've kept quiet, but it sounds like it's an amazing adaptation, but is it Amazing Night at the Theatre?
Well, yeah, I mean, I sort of think it's very clearly, when you watch it, a very good adaptation of a novel. Often I think one of the problems of adaptation is that you lose that sort of narrative sense and that sort of the kind of gorgeous texture of writing and language, which can be a lot of the appeal in the novel, especially, I assume, in the case of one that's just so genuinely horrible. But in this case, that is sort of overcome by a device which sounds annoying but isn't, and which also serves to make it possible to express a lot of the horror that Jude goes through without having to show it. So the majority of the abuse is actually described instead of shown, even though you feel like you're seeing it. It's done in a very elegant way and sort of seamless, which is very difficult to hear, but makes it possible to keep watching. Look, you say, is it a great night at the theatre? I cannot in all conscience recommend it because it is deeply unpleasant. But it is good.
There's something about the sort of alchemy of this, the way the different parts interact that have made it the hottest ticket in town. I think it's not just James Norton. If it is just James Norton and it's just Grantchester fans going along, I think they're going to be massively shocked and surprised. I think most people know what they're taking on with this. There were a couple of walkouts last night on the night I saw it.
I didn't see any actually. Well, I don't think we had any fainters.
A couple of people didn't come back after that. So nobody left, I think, during the course of, or not in my sight line, during the course of the action. Luke Thompson is great. He's a sort of, bouncy, charming
lovely,
as the actor villain. Omari Douglas has a nice sort of little scene-stealing turn as the artist JB, this very acid, queeny, bitchy character. The fourth character,
Zach Wyatt. He plays Malcolm, who's just like a nice guy architect and really doesn't get much to do.
No, he all he has to do is sort of rush in and say, "I've designed this flat for you," or "I've designed this house for you." That's his sole role, really. Zubin Vala, I think, is great in a really tough role as this entirely selfless individual, older man who adopts Jude as an adult without wanting anything from him. That's almost impossible to play, and he does it very delicately and well.
Are there any laughs?
A couple in the second half.
Yeah, maybe. I do remember a certain... I don't think it was that funny. I think we were all just relieved.
Yes, I think that's right.
That's on at the Harold Pinter Theatre until June the 18th.
Shall we go for a quick ad break?
Yes, coming up, Nick Clark and I will be joined by Natasha Hodgson and David Cumming of Spit Lip Productions to talk about their new musical, Operation Mincemeat, so stick around.
In the meantime, why not give our podcast a rating? Your chance to critique the critics, but 5 stars would be much appreciated.
Hi, I'm Marisha Wallace, and you're listening to the Evening Standard Theatre Podcast.
Today we're thrilled to be joined by Natasha Hodgson and David Cumming, one half of the theatre company Spit Lip, the geniuses behind the musical Operation Mincemeat, which opens at the Fortune Theatre in the West End on May the 10th. Natasha and David, welcome. Hooray!
Hello.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
Could you very briefly tell us what the musical Operation Mincemeat is about?
Absolutely. So it's 1943 and we are currently the Allies losing the war.
Uh-oh.
Oh no, not a good situation for us. And Churchill has basically rounded up his weirdest guys, that's a technical term, to say we need some strange ideas in which to try and make Hitler and his troops move away from mainland Europe because they are all over at the moment and it's no good for us. And so, one of the crazy ideas that he came up with them alongside people like Ian Fleming, who was working for MI5 at the time, was this mission Operation Mincemeat, which was essentially to dress up a homeless corpse as a military man, throw him in the sea via a submarine, wash him up in Spain, hopefully, containing fake documents about a mission to where we're going to arrive in Europe, all of it fake, and hope that Hitler found it, that his troops delivered it to him, and that it would make him move a load of troops so we could enter Europe faithfully and easily.
Easy.
As simple as that, really.
Spoiler alert. We won the war.
Yeah, we did it.
And where did you come across the story first?
So basically, we've been a comedy troupe for a bit, putting a little bit more of music every single time because we couldn't help ourselves. Every single new show, it was like, is there another song in this?
Yeah, we love a song. Come on.
And we basically had to admit to ourselves that we were essentially at this point sort of starting to write musicals.
Yeah, it was a horrible realization.
It was terrible. We're still not over it, honestly. We wanted to base it on a true story, just because we thought that would give us like a good backbone, and we'd never written a musical before. but we were struggling to find something. And I was on holiday with my family and my younger brother, who is a vet, so doesn't really know about this creative stuff, as I enjoy telling him, was like, just took out his headphones and was like, I know a thing that should be a musical. I'm listening to a podcast on it right now. And I was like, Joe, listen, stick to the cows and the sheep. You don't know what you're talking about. But unfortunately, it was about Operation Mincemeat. It was a Stuff You Should Know podcast about Operation Mincemeat. And I listened to it and thought, well, crap, he's done it. And I sent it to the rest of the guys. And unfortunately, we thought to ourselves, are we really going to make a musical about World War II?
Yeah, I mean, initially I was like, you are having
He wasn't happy.
Absolutely not. And then I listened and I was like, oh, for God's sake.
There's crazy corpses, there's mad pilots, there's coroners, there's secret agents doing mad stuff everywhere.
It's just not the World War II that you ever get taught about. You're like, wait a sec, this is bonkers and fun and silly and mad.
The story, as you said, it's been around for a while. There are books, there are films, but this is a very different approach to the story, isn't it?
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Well, when we heard the story, we were struck by, as we said, how bonkers and crazy and madcap it is. And the more we dug into it, the more insane it seemed to get. So from our perspective, any version that isn't.
That is a comedy, guys.
Yeah, it's definitely a comedy.
That's crazy business.
It's definitely a comedy. It's a buddy comedy. So seeing other productions take a slightly different, more perhaps po-faced route or more serious route is, of course, interesting. It's just not how we viewed the shape of the story itself.
I think also, like, one of the books that we read, as you said, there's a few around, but Ewan Montague, who Colin Firth plays, and indeed I play in the show, he wrote a book called The Man Who Never Was about his experiences of doing this mission. And it's so funny, and he is such a funny man, and they're obviously having the time of their lives. For us, not those people, that was a really funny angle and a way in, and particularly because it's stage and you kind of, there's lots of imaginative stuff you can do on stage. We knew from the top that we could play these people and it would be fine. Whereas in a more serious movie adaptation or whatever, you can't really have the fun of that. You can't really do commentary on the thing that you're portraying quite so easily away. For us, it was a really fun puzzle tangle to kind of extract the fun of the mission and like the admiration for the genius of what occurred, but also at the same time kind of taking a pop at the top and going like, yeah, sure, you could do it. You've got all the money and the power.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's a lot easier when you can do that.
It was a brilliant and ingenious plan, but you don't shy away. One of the things I really enjoyed is that you don't shy away from showing the sort of the sheer arrogance of these guys.
Oh, we love it.
I mean, actually, talking about that book in particular, Man Who Never Was, when you know actually what happened, because Montague was desperate for everyone to know that he'd done this, and obviously it's a secret World War II mission.
Come on, Ewan.
His job is to not let anyone know it's happened. And he was so desperate, he kept literally asking the government, being like, can I tell anyone? Can I tell anyone? And apparently some journalists got a whiff of it. Some journalists like you guys got a whiff of it.
The worst scum of the universe.
And the government were like, oh, okay, well, we need to get ahead of the story, put out your version. And obviously it's a redacted version of events, but also Chumley, who I play in the show and Matthew McFadden plays in the film, he was kind of brains behind it, and Montague was the kind of driving force, the engine that
kind of handsome, cool, charming.
Fine. And Chumley didn't want anything to do with it because he was still a secret agent pretty much and was abiding by the rules. And so Monty's version is just him basically being like, and I walked in the room and I said, God damn it, I've got to do this.
Pencil pushers.
And you can just feel the kind of arrogance, and he's just got free reign to say whatever he wants about his own mission.
They also do, like, there's a bit of revisionist history of it in that they claim that the body that they used, they had got legally in Montague's official story, which of course ended up, it didn't end up being true. They got the body illegally. They didn't know whose it was for a long time. There's stuff that we couldn't, in all good faith, we couldn't just put a version of the story out on stage, which was just like, and the good boys did good things, and everything was good, because it didn't feel that way. But also at the same time, what we didn't want to do is create a story that felt like these were people with terrible.
No, they don't have bad. Bad people.
It's like, I think what's really nice about these characters in this story for us anyway is that you can't really say, well, there's the villain of the piece, there's the good guy. It's complicated, and people do many things for many different reasons. And that exploring those elements of all the characters has been really, really good fun for us.
The show leans into the absurdity, obviously, with the songs and the comedy and all of that, but
Also, it treads that fine line when it needs to of, the tragedy and the loss behind it. It is the Second World War. A lot of people died. How easy did you find finding that tone, and how did it come sort of gradually?
That's a really good question.
Yeah, it came very much gradually. I think we come from a kind of comedy horror background, so we are very versed in focusing on the joke side of things or the dark comedy side of things. We have been less versed in kind of dealing with larger, more sentimental, emotional moments.
Yeah, but I think what was really helpful for us is that we literally couldn't just go down honourable route with this story. Obviously from the very beginning, we were very aware of the heritage and the responsibility of caring for this story and the people to whom this story would mean something. And so we had no way out in a kind of really helpful way. And we had to sort of be vulnerable ourselves in a way that we haven't really had to do as theatre makers before, and vulnerable with each other. Yeah. And it was very frightening and remains in some ways quite scary to do that. But the reaction to the show has been just such a monumental lesson for us in, if you take brave leaps and you try and be honest with yourself and you try and be vulnerable and you try and speak honest emotion to people, they give you that back.
And the show, it started at New Diorama. Shout out to one of the unsung heroes of London theatre. Went to Southwark Playhouse, went to the Riverside, and now is in the West End. So how has it changed along the way?
So much.
Oh gosh, there's so many old versions of scripts.
The curse of being in a show that you've also written is that you cannot ever leave the bloody thing alone.
It's got shorter, we can tell you that much.
Yes, thank God.
The original version, one scene was 26 minutes long. Yeah. One song.
That's now 9 minutes long.
Yeah, so it's done quite well there. It has grown up, I think. We've certainly added more emotional beats, more kind of dealing with the wider truths of the story.
I think also because obviously we all had to have a little break for the old friend Pando, which obviously was dreadful in every possible single way. But for us specifically, what was interesting about it is that we were struggling, I think, with there's a couple of amazing female parts in the show that are based on real people. Hester being one, Jean Leslie, the younger sort of agent, being the other, and we were struggling to kind of resolve their story in the second act. At some point in the story, Jean gets booted off the mission. We needed a song to kind of reflect where her emotional state was, and we were just struggling to kind of put our finger on what the problem, what that emotion for her was. And actually being in the pandemic and suddenly having this, all of us having this rush of how helpless we were, and not just helpless, but how useless we were, was just so striking. I remember everyone was on Facebook groups being like, can I deliver medicine to my neighbour? Can I deliver turnips to Mrs. Grouse down the road? Everyone was desperate to do anything. And actually we were talking about that when we were talking about this story, and how actually at the crux of it, the worst thing about being part of a team that's being helpful and then no longer be able to do that is you're back to being useless. You're back to not being helpful. And so we've been very lucky to have such an amazing development period, really.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think similarly, the kind of crux of the story, or the kind of moral, I suppose, at the end is that kind of everyone matters. It's not just the people at the top. It's not just the ones that are lauded as the heroes. It's all the quote-unquote little people as well, including this homeless man whose body they use. He is part of this story. And also there's the irony of someone who fell through the nets of society, their body being used to then prop up and save that society at the end, that ultimately everyone does matter. And
we didn't have that at the beginning, did we?
Definitely didn't.
We had a lot of hats, a lot of jokes about Nazis.
Yeah, and that kind of grew, and that softness and that honouring of the actual everyone involved in this grew with the story. I think as we kind of felt the size of the show.
I think we just grew up as the show grew up, didn't we? We kind of were less frightened of tackling the stuff that felt more important in a sort of wider sense. So yeah, it was great to have that time.
Natasha and David, thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Coming up after this quick ad break, we'll be reviewing For Black Boys Who Have Considered Suicide When the Hue Gets Too Heavy. If you hadn't yet done so, don't forget to give us a review below and hit subscribe. We'll see you back here in just a minute.
Hi, I'm Matthew Modine, and you're listening to the Evening Standard Theatre Podcast.
Welcome back to the Evening Standard Theatre Podcast. Now we're reviewing For Black Boys Who Have Considered Suicide When the Hue Gets Too Heavy by actor and writer Ryan Calais Cameron. Nick, you saw this last night, didn't you?
I did, and the buzz, I have to say, started from outside the theatre. There were queues all the way around the block for this one. It was amazing. And the buzz was in the queue. There was no sad faces. No, everyone was really excited. And it just worked in the space. It mixes dance, it mixes singing, but largely it is monologue. 6 young black men are in what looks like a group therapy session. There's no sort of therapy leader or anything, but they take it in turns to discuss issues that are on their mind. And that can range from anything from police harassment to abusive fathers. But basically, it's all the issues, familial, societal, that are put on young black men, how they cope with it, what they think about it. And I've got to say, I don't think I've ever seen anything like this.
No, me either.
A representation of black masculinity on stage or screen. What's amazing about this show, it feels like young men talking. But the amazing thing is that they're talking about things that young men never talk about.
Yeah.
So on the one hand, it feels absolutely in the register of banter. And on the other, they are discussing things that I know this, and Ryan told me this, as I interviewed Ryan, that people don't discuss. They were coming up to him afterwards to say, oh, I can't believe you've articulated something that I've never spoken about, and you're absolutely spot on. I mean, essentially, these come from deep within him. Even though there's 6 characters and all with very big varying points of view, I think they all originate obviously with him. This showcases all different opinions about all manner of subjects, and I think the joy of it, even when it gets really dark, is how vital and how brilliantly it comes across. I think
each of the performers sort of shifts between different characters through
they sort of like they each have their own very distinct personality, and each has his own distinct story. None of them have names as such, and they never speak the names, and the names in the script are all variations on the color black. So onyx, midnight, sable, pitch, all that kind of thing. They do all each have their own character, but they do sort of move seamlessly between, and in a sort of a way. And so I think you never lose track, or you never lose sight of the fact that they are, while telling an individual story, speaking on behalf of countless black men whose stories do mirror their own to a greater or lesser extent.
Above all, the sentence that really leapt out to me is saying that black men are not a monolith. And it's really trying to show something, different sides, different aspects, allow young black men to be themselves.
Yeah, there's the lad from the ends who feels he has to subscribe to all the kind of toxic masculinity that implies. There's the sort of slightly camp, painfully shy comics nerd who doesn't know where he fits in anywhere. There are so many, and they all have their own anxieties that they keep locked away, and they're all different, but they all do have a commonality of experience up to a point.
I was thinking alongside Red Pitch, which was at the Bush last year and which won our most promising playwright award for Tyrrell Williams. That and this together made me realise how much we've been lacking in this sort of representation of young black men on the stage. These sort of sympathetic, generous, open-hearted characters are not what we're used to seeing.
No, it's true. It's interesting what you were talking about, the representation of black young men on stage. One of the things I felt that was super interesting, and I think quite rewarding as a white audience member, is to be party to something you can't fully be part of in the theatre. Like the privilege that we have in the theatre is that we are nearly always the intended audience, and the references are directed at us, and that is not the case here. And it doesn't matter, in terms of my deep enjoyment of the show, but the reactions throughout of audience members of colour on the night that I went made it very clear there is a whole layer of cultural references that went straight over my head because I am not black. And though no two, obviously, people's experience is the same, there is a commonality. And I think it's important and possibly eye-opening if you've not had that before. And I find that more and more now, and that's exciting.
Yeah.
But for a white theatre goer to, A, get an inkling of what it is like not to be part of the dominant culture in the room at the theatre, and also of the kind of depth and richness of a culture that you don't know that much about because you've never had to try. Is actually really, like, if you can just go, oh, okay, cool, that's how I'm going to experience the world tonight, I mean, it's a privilege to be able to do that without being forced to. But I think it's a very valuable experience.
I was talking to Tinook Craig when she was reviving Jitney, the Old Vic, the August Wilson play, and she was saying that there's an important thing about having spaces where it is about the black experience, first and foremost and primarily, rather than just that reacting to white society or things like that. And it is a real difference.
Well, and it was kind of a privilege to be there at the curtain call, I've got to say, because as it gets to this tatery sort of finale, the people around me just, exploded. There were amens. It was extraordinary, and they were on their feet. Yeah, to be part of that, and as you say, on the outside of that, but really just to enjoy the show, but just see how much it meant to so many people was an extraordinary moment.
Yeah, and I also think it's worth saying the way that they interact on stage is completely seamless, and there is not a weak link among the cast. And actually, I think all of these boys were nominated for the Best Supporting Actor Olivier Award, and I think you, Nick, also were quite disappointed that they didn't win. I thought Will Keane was great in Patriots, but I was disappointed not to see these boys on the stage. And they are Mark Akintomayin, Emmanuel Akwafo, Nabiko Ejimafo, Dara Hand, Aruna Jallo, and Kane Lawrence. Every single one of them is absolutely brilliant. There isn't a moment where you go, I don't believe in that person.
And for them to have stayed together as an ensemble since, I believe that it's the same ensemble that started after the new diorama. They obviously are incredibly tight and incredibly. I've seen them interviewed together as well, and they're obviously they've formed themselves into this really, really seamless unit.
And I presume they do it every night, but at the end they all went after the bow. They all went into a huddle.
Oh, I know.
They clearly feel
Maybe some awards ceremonies need to occasionally create an ensemble award.
Yeah,
I think it's slightly insulting to nominate these guys for Best Supporting Actor. Who's supporting whom? They're all supporting each other.
That's exactly what they'd say. In every sense. I was really sad not to see them on the stage.
Yeah, and for Best New Play, I've got to say, I thought.
Yeah.
Give them his flowers. That's what I say.
Yeah.
Give them all their flowers.
What a time to be alive, though, in London. This variety out there, it is extraordinary. And I think there is also a sort of post-pandemic nimbleness in producers that people are picking up on stuff, putting them on for short runs, chancing their arms slightly, maybe not, not massively, not booking out of West End Theatre for a year. But, there just does seem to be greater.
I've got to say, and it's booking well. So I had a look this morning. There are still tickets available. I wondered partly whether, following our discussion last week about Streetcar, whether for this pricing is key. And the top prices are 69 quid. That's right in the middle of the stalls. But
really?
But in the
That's
stalls,
cheap as chips.
In the stalls,
comparatively speaking.
But in the stalls, you can get 50 quid tickets.
Yeah, you wouldn't be able to get your leg into Streetcar. For £69.
But they go to 20 quid in the balcony. And
oh my God, book! Everyone book now.
What else is there to say?
We're not in the pocket of
of Nika Burns.
That's it for this week's episode of the Evening Standard Theatre Podcast.
Thanks to our guests this week, Natasha Hodgson and David Cumming. Make sure to go and listen through our previous episodes too. We've got Jenna Coleman, Stephen Moffat, Marisha Wallace and Danny Mays.
You can find all our reviews and news online at standard.co.uk. We'll see you next week.